On March the 20th, 1921, a referendum was held in Upper Silesia where the inhabitants could decide if they wanted to be part of Poland or part of Germany. A large part of this area had been part of Poland before the 18th century partitions of the country. Due to the growth of heavy industry and mineral deposits, particularly coal, iron ore, and to a lesser extent zinc and other metals, this area was strongly desired by both sides. In the summer of 1920, there had been a plebiscite in East Prussia where the inhabitants could decide if they wanted to live in Poland or Germany. The result was an overwhelming victory for the German side, with only very small areas going over to Poland. East Prussia, however, did not have the economic clout of Upper Silesia. Upper Silesia was then the second highest producing heavy industrial area in Germany. There were also other major differences between a plebiscite in this area as opposed to East Prussia. In East Prussia there was a Polish-speaking population, but on the whole they were Protestants and strongly resented the idea of being taken over by Catholics who came from what had been Russia. They were far more assimilated with their German neighbours. They resented people coming in from the south, telling them what to do. The plebiscite in East Prussia had occurred at a time when Poland was in dire straits in the war against the Soviets. The Red Army was closing down on the Polish capital, and people were afraid of the reports of Soviet bestiality which had been widely published. A vote for Poland was thus seen as potentially ending up in a communist country. However, there were also things which were common to both. People were afraid of losing their pensions. Germany, after all, had an advanced social welfare system and the potential of a much stronger economy. Poland was a leap in the dark, although the Polish government had promised to maintain social security benefits. There may also have been the fear of harmonizing vastly different legal systems which had hitherto existed in the Russian, Austrian and German empires, out of which the new Poland was being created. In Upper Silesia, the census returns showed many areas with a majority Polish-speaking population. Unlike in East Prussia, those campaigning for the Polish side were locals and not Poles from what had been Russia. To make it more complicated, there were those who considered themselves neither Polish nor German, but Silesians. Even in the 2011 Polish census, there were more than 817,000 people who declared that they were Silesian, making this the largest minority in Poland today. They speak what I would argue is a dialect of Polish, but they probably think it's a separate language. The most popular organization for these people was the Bund der Oberschleiser, or Związek Górnoślązaków. In the lead up to the plebiscite, the Związek Górnoślązaków tried to get concessions from both parties. Some within it may have preferred outright independence, but that was not being offered. Polish speakers were an absolute majority in the countryside, frequently German speakers the majority in the towns. This suggests that many of those who came to work here during the Industrial Revolution came from other areas of Prussia and then Germany. Furthermore, under Bismarck, there had been an active policy to encourage, if not force, the use of German above all other languages, which could mean that children only had that language at school and perhaps grew up speaking it outside of the house. Unlike in East Prussia, both Germans and Poles were Catholics. The region had a small Protestant minority, probably only around 10%, and largely confined to the towns. The Western Allies took a keen interest in the fate of Upper Silesia because of its economic potential. It seems as though France wanted to weaken Germany, so was happy to support Polish claims, whereas the British and Italian governments feared that Germany would not be able to make reparation payments without it. At that time, Germany was about to fail to make payments, so this was not an exaggerated claim. It is quite clear that there was a strong Polish majority in some areas, and others had an overwhelming German majority. It is often claimed that the Polish government wanted the plebiscite to take place only in the territory to the east. However, as you can see from this map presented to the Paris Peace Conference by the Polish delegation in 1919, that was not true. The Polish side was proposing a border which would have taken in the entire plebiscite area. Had the plebiscite been held in only those areas which there was a Polish majority, then the result would have been much clearer and the problem resolved much quicker. During the period leading up to the plebiscite, the German police and administration remained in place, which was clearly advantageous to the German side when there was increasing unrest. Volunteers flooded to the Freikorps, paramilitary German nationalist organizations. They came from as far away as Bavaria. Poles joined the Polish military organization and the two sides fought each other, both unofficially, but both with the covert support of their respective governments. Here the advantage was very much in favour of the Germans. The Freikorps were made up largely of ex-service personnel and thus had military training and access to weapons. The German police invariably sided with the Freikorps. Two Polish uprisings had already occurred before the plebiscite, which led to an intensified level of hatred amongst people who had previously lived together. The right to vote was granted to all aged 20 and older who had been either born or had lived in the plebiscite area. The vote took place on the 20th of March 1921. A total of 707,605 votes were cast for Germany and 479,359 for Poland. At a cursory glance, it seems it's a major victory for the German side. However, when one looks at the breakdown of how the vote went, then it becomes clear that it needs a second look. Unhappy that predominantly Polish areas were to remain in Germany, the Third Silesian uprising broke out shortly afterwards. The matter was brought before the League of Nations. In 1922, it was decided that Upper Silesia should be divided. This was accepted by both countries. Approximately 736,000 Poles and 260,000 Germans thus found themselves now in Polish Upper Silesia, and 532,000 Poles and 637,000 Germans remained in German Upper Silesia. As there were far more Poles in Germany than vice versa, this figure suggests that Germany got rather a good deal despite losing the economically richest area. That, however, is a story for another time.